The paradigm for what drives disease has to shift and is shifting. It used to be thought one gene, one disease. And by that same rationale, if it's one gene, one disease, that means it's one gene, one disease, one pill. A pill for every ill. That's another way of saying it, right? Now, the paradigm is shifting because now we understand that we actually don't have genes for most illnesses. And there are some rare genetic susceptibilities, but for the most part, most chronic illnesses are lifestyle disorders. And when you say lifestyle disorders, the first thing you think about is like being overweight and obese and not eating right and all that, right? That's just part of it. The other part is how are we compromising those 2.5 million genes that we have within us that we utilize every single day, every minute to function as a human? That's when we start seeing a significant movement towards disease, is when we compromise that gene pool that's so critical to our function, right? Almost every chronic disease can be traced back to some sort of disruption in your microbiome.
Welcome to Your Health Reset, where we address the real root causes behind health issues today to get you rapid results on your health journey so you can be who you came here to be, mind, body, and spirit. I'm your host, Sinclair, survivor of complex chronic illness, expert on resolving root causes, and co-founder of Detox Rejuvenation and Meditation RX. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode. And today I am joined by wonderful health luminary and a major contributor to the functional medicine space, Kiran Krishnan. Thanks so much for being on the episode here with us, Kiran Krishnan. We just love the contribution you've made to the space and can't wait to dive in together into this juicy topic.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Okay, so I would actually love to start with how you got into this field of work. What was your journey? Because I think it's really interesting and always helps illuminate things for people.
Yeah, so, my parents are both scientists of sorts on different ends of the spectrum. My mom is a medical doctor, so she's on the biological end of the science world. And my dad was a microelectronics engineer. So he's an engineer, physicist, so the other spectrum of it. And I found that I kind of bridge the gap between those two. I like to think like an engineer and physicist because I bring systems into play when you start looking at biology. One of the big issues with biology and medical science is we tend to silo ourselves in very narrow areas of focus, right? You're a gut doctor, you're a brain doctor, you're a scientist who just works on this one thing and that one thing. And so the systems part of biology starts to get clouded as people dive deeper and deeper into one small area. And so to me, when I always looked at biology, I always looked at it from a systems perspective. And it was very big for me to connect the dots. But how I got into science to begin with was, as a kid, I've always been one of those super curious kids. I was never one to take for granted how things around me worked and how they functioned. I was always the type to have to understand the world around me. I'll give you an example because I grew up in India and Malaysia, and I moved to the US just before high school. So I moved here when I was 14. And that was the first time I saw a microwave, right? And we didn't have any such thing in India and Malaysia. And it was so puzzling to me how you put food in this thing and 30 seconds later it's hot. And I remember asking all my friends about what is this thing? How does it work? And nobody knew and nobody cared, right? They're like, why do you care? You just put it in there and push 30 seconds and it's hot. But that's the kind of thing that just irks at me. I need to know how that happens. So of course, I would figure out how it happens and learn everything I can about the microwave. And so that same mentality of wanting to understand the world around me drove me easily towards science. And of course, I had the influence of my parents. And how I picked microbiology is actually from a movie. So the first week when I was at university, I knew I wanted to go into science. I wasn't sure what field, whether it's chemistry or physics or biology. Then I saw that movie Outbreak, which will show you how old I am, actually. That was my freshman year of college. It had come out maybe a couple of years before that. That was it with Morgan Freeman and Dustin Hoffman. It was this big pandemic outbreak that occurred, right? So it was a viral outbreak. They worked for the CDC and they were chasing this virus and trying to figure out a cure for it and all that. So that really excited me as this exciting part of science, And so that's when I started getting into the world of microbiology. And then once you're in the world of microbiology, there's so many different ways to go. What became really apparent to me is that there's a lot of focus on the tiny, tiny, minuscule number of organisms that actually cause disease. There's not many when you look at the whole grand scheme of things. Most organisms out there are either benign or helpful in some way. So it became very interesting to me to study and understand the rest of the microbial world versus that hyper focus that's put on the pathogenic organisms, right? So I started focusing on that. Human microbiome project came along right around then, and I was like, this is a perfect fit for me. I'm going to focus my career on the microbiome.
I love it. We each have our way into this space, and I don't think it's ever by accident.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would love to dive in today. We've long been very interested in your product line and your development process because it's so clear when using your products in a clinical environment versus, say, some of the competition out there. And they've certainly proliferated, but there's a very clear difference in working with what you have designed. So I would love for you to speak about what goes into your approach that has actually made your products so effective. And I'd also love to unpack today what you think about this explosion of chronic illness that we're seeing and how these two things may be related.
They're amazingly well related. So prior to starting Microbiome Labs, I had been in this industry for already almost 15 years at that point. I was working a lot more behind the scenes. I was working as a consultant for lots of companies on their product development, on the science side of it, to try to help them with bringing actual real science to products and researching them and running clinical trials and so on. So I was very familiar with how most companies in our space develop products, right? And it's really this simple, how most companies develop products. It's all driven by marketing, right? And it's about doing Google searches. They literally will spend time looking at Google Analytics to see what consumers are searching. And if consumers are searching for grapeseed, right, that all of a sudden there's a spike because there was an article in something about grapeseed, or Dr. Oz talked about it or something, then their next product they're developing is a grapeseed product. And that's exactly how the vast majority of it goes. And to me, that is a massive disservice to consumers, to health conscious people who are looking for these products as tools to improve their health and wellness, right? Because they're trying to depart away from the medicine side of the world. They don't want to wait till they're sick to have to take a medicine. They're trying to take their health into their own hands and empower themselves. And they need tools to do that, right? And so doing Google-based development of products and just what's hot, what's trending, those kind of things just are a massive disservice to people for me. And so we started looking at probiotics, and we said the probiotic space especially is a space where there's so much potential because microbes are that powerful and they're that important to our overall well-being. But the vast majority of companies are taking the Google kind of a maniacal approach to it, right? Like I've been in development meetings with companies who are trying to develop their next probiotic. And they'll say things like, okay, so we're going to do 15 strains and 50 billion CFUs. And my first question as a microbiologist would be like, why? Why 15 strains? Why 50 billion CFUs? Where did you come up with this, right? And the answer is, well, our closest competitor has 10 strains and 30 billion CFUs, so we need to be a little bit better, right? And so we're like, that's just the marketing-driven mentality behind product development. When we started Microbiome Labs, we started with one singular purpose, and that was to find therapeutic gaps and put science in the driver's seat. We've been around since 2013, right? So now we're going on our 10th year, and we did not have a marketing department till year 6. And that was very deliberate because we did not want market information and marketing things to drive the company, right? We purely put science in the driver's seat. And so it was really a big focus on understanding the biology of what's happening, understanding where the gaps are, where we needed to try to fill the gaps with what nature has already provided us. And then most importantly, studying it, proving that it works, not assuming it's going to work because these other 10 companies have similar products, right? Or using borrowed science, studying it and elevating the science. To me, any company in this space, it should be part of their duty to elevate the science of natural medicine, to bring it more to mainstream and make it more affordable to more people. That's really should be the end goal. So that became our singular goal, was finding therapeutic gaps, driving the development by science, and then educating and researching and adding to the collective knowledge in the space.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I know that our audience really wants to understand how the sausage is made, so to speak. They don't want to take things at face value. I'm very much interested in knowing the reasoning behind everything that they might take to help with their health.
Yeah. And that's a reason why many of our competitors in our particular channel, which services kind of the health practitioner space, right? Many of our competitors have 200 or 300 products, and that's why we have 25. Because we're really looking to solve problems that are out there. And if somebody's doing it well already, we don't need to do it, right? I don't care how hot it is, how trending it is, how many times a Kardashian posted about it, and what the business opportunity is. It doesn't matter. If somebody else is doing it well, let them do it. Because there's so many problems that need to be solved. We don't need to spend our time and effort getting into something that's just hot.
Perfect. So let's talk about those problems, because we're seeing an explosion in chronic conditions, right? And chronic diagnoses now. Over half the population of adults and children are, considered not well. What have you seen from your perspective in the space in terms of the conditions that are the biggest issues and the fastest growing, and what your approach can do to help?
I was around in school when the Human Genome Project was going on. And in fact, one of the big research centers of the Human Genome Project was at University of Iowa, where I was, right? And in the same laboratories where I was working. What was interesting as an outcome of that is, prior to the initiation of the Human Genome Project, the assumption was that for every chronic illness we deal with, we're going to find a gene that's driving it. That chronic illness was largely driven by genetic mishaps. If you had heart disease, you have a heart disease gene. If you have, a cancer of some sort, you've got a cancer gene. And sure, genetics plays a component of it, right? But it's a much more minor component than we ever imagined. And we also discovered that humans are wholly inadequate to function based on our own genome, right? We've got somewhere around 22,000 functional genes in our own chromosomes. And that may sound like a lot, but when you think about an earthworm that has 30,000 genes, we're not as cool as an earthworm is. Then the big question is, how are we this sophisticated? Well, that's because we harbor 2.5 million microbial genes in our system. So we have 150, 200 times more microbial genetic material in our system that we use to function as a human than we have human genes. And so the paradigm for what drives disease has to shift and is shifting. It used to be thought, one gene, one disease, right? And by that same rationale, if it's one gene, one disease, that means it's one gene, one disease, one pill for the cure of it. So one pill, one ill, a pill for every ill. That's another way of saying it, right? Now, the paradigm is shifting, because now we understand that we actually don't have genes for most illnesses. And there are some rare genetic susceptibilities, but for the most part, most chronic illnesses are lifestyle disorders. And when you say lifestyle disorders, the first thing you think about is like being overweight and obese and not eating right and all that, right? That's just part of it. The other part is, how are we compromising those 2.5 million genes that we have within us that we utilize every single day, every minute to function as a human? That's when we start seeing a significant movement towards disease, is when we compromise that gene pool that's so critical to our function. And that is when we compromise our microbiome ecology, right? Almost every chronic disease can be traced back to some sort of disruption in your microbiome, right? As a major driver of the disease, if not the actual pure cause of the disease. And so what we're starting to see now with chronic illness is that we have created a scenario in which we are a microbial construct, right? We are made up of microbes. We're a walking, talking rainforest. We're made up of thousands of different species of organisms that have to live together in harmony in order for this human body to function as a whole. We've taken this gorgeous, beautiful microbial construct and we've put it in an antimicrobial world. And so we are living in literally what would be called an anti-human world. Most of the things we've created around us do not support our system. And when we disrupt that system, when we disrupt that ecosystem, we start easing our way towards disease. To me, the most fundamental thing that I've seen that drives vast majority of conditions is leaky gut. And actually, that was a big goal of the company when we started, is how do we resolve leaky gut? There is no chronic disease that you can mention to me that I can't show you a biological pathology that comes from leaky gut, right? And why is it that leaky gut is such a big driver? Because leaky gut is the biggest source of inflammation in the body. And inflammation is at the foundation of every chronic disease, right? You can't have disease for the most part without inflammation. So it all comes down to this microbial ecosystem, how we're disrupting it every single day by the choices we make and the world that we've created around us. And then how that disruption leads to inflammation, and how inflammation becomes the root of the vast majority of chronic illnesses.
I think that's a beautiful overview of what we've just done to ourselves.
Yeah, right? So it's so crazy when you think about everything we've done that works. It ends up working against us quite a bit, right? So we live in these gorgeous modern homes, and we work in beautiful buildings, and we drive nice cars and all that. But all of that also divorces us from nature, which over the last 4 million years, we've evolved to be within nature. We are supposed to be in this constant osmosis with the natural environment. We're shedding organisms, we're picking up organisms, we're picking up genetic material and proteins and peptides and all of these things from the natural world. But then we've gone and divorced ourselves from it. And it becomes really easy to spend great lengths of time not being exposed to nature at all. For example, you feel grounded and good by living near the ocean, right? And there's a reason for that. Yes, the ocean is beautiful, and there's a psychological component to seeing the ocean and hearing the waves and seeing the sunset over the water and all that, right? But there's a biological reason as well. There's a lot of data that shows that ocean spray that comes off of the top millimeters of the ocean as the waves crash and hit into the shore and all that, the ocean spray aerosolizes microbes from the ocean high up into the air, and actually and blows across the entire environment on the coast. And we pick up those microbes, right, to respiration on our skin and all that. And those microbes have a positive impact on our outcomes and our outlook on things. Those same microbes actually form clouds in the sky and change the weather patterns in the ocean. Now what we're starting to see is, again, our ability to screw things up, right? As we contaminate our oceans, what's happening is we're changing the types of microbes that bloom in the ocean. And when we change the types of microbes that bloom on the ocean, then the impact of living near the ocean actually starts to decline. And because we're creating more egregious microbes, when they form clouds over the coast, they actually change weather patterns and impact weather in a more negative way. So our contamination of the oceans actually will change not only your biology by living near the ocean, but it'll change all your weather patterns near the ocean as well. That's the systems biology approach that I like to think about, right? Like, how are all these things connected? That's our ability to disrupt nature, right? We found a way, like cruise ships, once they go a mile offshore, they can dump all their waste into the ocean, right? 2,000 people's worth of poop they can dump into the ocean because now they're they're outside those maritime laws, right? So
yeah, this is actually going to, unfortunately, this is the truth that we have to face, right? And we talk about this all the time in our courses and all of this, that we have created the situation, perhaps without realizing it, but it is our job to fix it. No one's going to do it for us. And yeah, we need to do that at the personal level, which you might think we don't have as much power at the consumer level, but you're in charge of your own bubble. Mm-hmm. And then it will only shift at the rate that we demand that it does, right? Totally. So we've highlighted like the work of, Dr. Stephanie Seneff and, so many other scientific pioneers that are really looking at these disruptors that we've created and getting into the trenches, so to speak. What do you think the top disruptors are to the microbiome, both in nature and in our own health?
The list is actually quite long, but if I think about three things that are probably relatively common and can have a profound effect of the microbiome that leads to disease, I think one is what Stephanie's done a lot of work on is Roundup and glyphosate, right? So my group is actually publishing one of the first studies on what happens to a serene pediatric microbiome with just 3 weeks of exposure to Roundup. And we're talking about exposure at like cereal level, right? Not meaning a breakfast cereal level, not like crazy, egregious, toxic level of exposure, just like eating breakfast cereal that tends to be high in Roundup. And what we see in that 3-week period is a shift in the microbiome that already makes it look like it's a microbiome that's heading towards inflammatory bowel disease. And that's in just 3 weeks of exposure. So it's really alarming. That study is complete. The manuscripts are written. We work with King's College in London on that study, and we're putting it out there. It's going to be hopefully published in the next few months, which will be somewhat landmark in that field because nobody else has shown that yet. And again, that's to me part of the responsibility of a company in our space, right? We are a health and wellness company. We should elevate the science. We should show people what happens. We should invest in the science. So that's just an example of it. So I think Roundup and the ubiquity of it, right, it being everywhere is one. Number two is the overuse of antibiotics. Even the CDC estimates that at least 50% of the antibiotic prescriptions are for things that antibiotics aren't going to help, right? A great example of that, we were working with a couple of urgent care centers in Chicagoland area because we were trying to solve a problem, right? And the problem is actually driven by the consumer. And this is something that people should take note. What the urgent care centers told us, and they're for-profit centers, right? So they're running a business. People are coming in sick. They have the flu. They have a cold. They're feeling under the weather. The doctor in the urgent care center checks them out and goes, "It's a virus. You got a cold or a flu. It'll run its course." The people pressure the doctor to write a prescription because they want to leave with something. And if they don't get a prescription from that urgent care center, the next time they're not going to go there. They're actually going to go somewhere else where they're more readily prescribing antibiotics for colds and flus, things that don't require antibiotics, right? Especially in pediatric care. Apparently, when I talk to pediatricians, parents pressure them to write a prescription because I understand, I have kids. There's nothing worse than when your kids are sick, right? You feel so bad for them. You want them to get better immediately. You go to the doctor with the hope that there's an immediate solution to it. And if there isn't, if the doctor is just like, well, it's going to run its course, then the parents pressure them to write a prescription for it. And in the doctor's mindset, they think of these drugs as relatively safe, right? They've been around for a while. They don't understand the connection to the microbiome yet. They're not educated on it. So the doctor's mind is going, well, it's not really going to do them any harm. But all right, the patient really wants it. Here's a prescription. So over 50% of prescription of antibiotic scripts are for things that there aren't going to help. That's a CDC estimation, which I think is probably quite low, right? And so I think it's probably much higher than 50%. And when we look at studies on what antibiotics do to the microbiome, within the first dose, more than 90% of the microbes are wiped out, right? And they come back, but they come back in different proportions. A single course of antibiotics, you can see the disruption to that microbiome up to 2 years after taking that course of the antibiotics, right? So it's really impactful. Now, that's not to say that in some situations you need antibiotics and they're going to save your life, right? It's going to be important, but we definitely overuse it. So the first one is glyphosate. And again, one of the reasons why glyphosate works to damage the microbiome so well is because it is an antibiotic, but it's an antibiotic found in everything. Number two is a prescription antibiotic use. Number three is our disconnection from the natural microbial environment. That has such a profound impact on our health. I'll give you one great example of that. There's something called the Finnish allergy study, which is a big allergy and asthma study in Finland. And the reason why the government of Finland initiated this study is because they were seeing this epidemic rise in allergies and asthma in kids, right? All the way to really serious anaphylaxis type of responses to things like peanuts and so on. And so it became a real danger in schools and households. And so what they realized is that geographically, they are relatively close to a town in Russia that is almost the same geography, but it's only a couple hundred kilometers away. But when they look at the allergy and asthma rates of that town in Russia, it's much lower than where it is in Finland. So then the big question became, is if the environment is very similar, the ecosystem is very similar, why is it that they have far fewer allergies and asthma compared to the kids in Finland? So the government funded this big, long study, and they came to find out that the big reason and the main reason why the kids are having significant allergies is because of the sterility of the homes, right? How in the culture, it's all about clean, sterile, everything sterilized, and they don't have their doors and windows open as much. So they're not getting outside microbes coming into the system, right? Versus in that town in Russia that's not too far away, they don't sterilize most of the surfaces in their home. That's just not part of the culture there. And they keep the doors and windows open much more, right? For fresh air coming in. After that realization, what was really cool about it is they went one step further and they said, okay, so if it's exposure to the outside environment that's causing the problem, then we're going to select a number of daycares and primary schools, and we're going to create mud piles in these schools, right, of natural dirt. And we're going to write into the curriculum that kids have to play in this dirt for X amount of time throughout the week. So they started initiating that. And now they've been following those up. And sure enough, the schools with the mud piles, with kids that play in the mud, are starting to have a significant reduction in allergy and asthma rates, right, compared to the schools that don't have it. It's so clear when you look at it, the engagement with nature that we no longer have has equally a big of an impact on our microbiome than something that we put into our system that attacks the microbiome, right? So absence is just as bad as deliberate toxicity. So both of those are things we have to work on and deal with.
Wow. That is fascinating. Look into something that I know many of our listeners are already suspecting. So when we look at how to actually take this from here, most of our listeners are already dealing with a health issue. They're being really proactive about it. They might consider themselves high performers and maybe outpace everybody around them, but they still don't feel like themselves.
Yep.
All the way to at the other end of the spectrum, we have, the chronically ill people where it is their full-time job to get well. So do you have any advice for them in navigating this world of competing information where the practitioners and medical doctors are still catching up?
So looking at those two end of the spectrum of people, right? So the high performers that are actually not feeling great, and then the people that are chronically ill that really can't live the life that they want to live because they're chronically ill, right? Let me speak to that end of the spectrum first. So
wonderful.
The first thing that I think is really important, and I've worked with lots of chronically ill people through all the doctors and practitioners who work with, through research studies and all that. I think one of the first things that they have to embrace is the idea of hope that they will get better. They can and will get better, right? Because what tends to happen is when you go through a number of failed approaches, right? You've gone and seen a dozen doctors, you've seen traditional practitioners, you've seen functional medicine practitioners, you've gone through health coaches, you've done lots of the things, and you're not necessarily getting better just yet. That lack of hope sets in. And in fact, that lack of hope has a huge impact on your microbiome, which increases your inflammation, right? And that actually will perpetuate the condition. So what I want them to say from a scientist's perspective and somebody that understands systems biology and disease and I've published dozens of clinical trials, there is absolutely hope, right? There are very few chronic illnesses that cannot be improved, right? The vast majority of them can be improved quite significantly through some very simple, basic things. And I'll talk about what those simple, basic things are to think about. So number one is people need to know that you can make significant improvements in your overall outcome by simple habits and simple steps. So there is hope, right? Number two, you are not your illness. People define themselves by the illness that they've suffered from for years. And that is a manifestation of the illness in itself. I meet lots of people where they should basically introduce themselves like, hi, my name is SIBO, or right? Hi, my name is eczema, because that's the whole identity is their illness. And I understand it. I understand why they're there. But they need to detach themselves, their being, from that illness. That illness is a temporary thing and it will get better. So don't embrace it as your part of your identity, right? And that's psychologically and from a microbiome standpoint, it's very important. And I could go into an hour-long explanation of why that connection is so important, but we don't have the time. So just trust me, you want to divorce yourself from that identity, right? Don't tag yourself as an illness. Then let's look at some basic things that they should be really thinking about. One thing to keep in mind is that there is a significant additive effect from lots of small habits that you put together. Just like there was a lot of additive effects of lots of bad things that came together to form the illness. It wasn't just one big thing, right? It wasn't like one day you're fine, the next day you're sick. And it was years of additive things, exposure to things, consumption of things, putting things on, relationships, stress, all of these little things that all add up together to put you in the state of illness. The same way, small little decisions throughout your day will accumulate to get you out of that same spiral, right? So you can actually get out of it. So let's talk about what some of those simple things are. Number one, we talked about then engagement with nature, right? But you want to be prescriptive about how you go about it. We all know being outside is a good thing, but we don't do it in a prescriptive manner. I want you to try to prescribe yourself 3 or 4 times a week, 30 minutes at a time, going outside and being engaged in nature. Take it that seriously as if it was medicine, because it really is. There's enough data out there to show that it has a significant impact. And I don't mean going out in your front yard, and sitting down on the lawn. That's fine if that's the most you can do. But trying to get out to untapped nature environment, going to the beach in your case, right? Or going for a hike or a slow walk somewhere in the woods where you can engage with nature, it will make a difference. So that's one simple thing. Number 2, it's about not sterilizing your home, right? We have this misguided concept that clean means it has to have that synthetic lemon smell all over the place, right? And that we have to disinfect our home. 99% of the surfaces in your home do not need to be ever disinfected. In my home, we don't use disinfectants to clean most surfaces. We use a spray bottle of water. We might put a couple of drops of essential oil just with some smell in there. And that's it for most surfaces, right? If you want to disinfect your toilet, fine, I get it, do that. Your shower, mildew starts growing, do that. But the vast majority of surfaces, you don't have to. Now, if you get raw chicken juice on your counter, yes, disinfect it because there's salmonella there likely, or raw beef juice or something like that. But outside of that, you really don't have to, right? So that's a small thing you can start thinking about and trying to avoid doing. Another thing would be, if you can, try to add in some intermittent fasting. That's a simple thing that has been shown to increase the diversity of the microbiome. And you don't have to do it for very long, 12 hours, mostly overnight, push it to 13 hours after a week or two, push it to 14 hours. If you get somewhere in that 14-hour range, most of it overnight, then you're doing well, because your microbiome is something called a diurnal system where it has a 24-hour clock, just like your circadian rhythm. And when you're not feeding it, there are all of these microbes that proliferate during the periods of non-feeding that actually run a lot of housekeeping functions, right? They clean up damaged DNA. They increase something called mitophagy, which is a removal of damaged mitochondria and replacing it with new mitochondria. They clean up like inflammation. They repair all kinds of things that have been damaged. So all of that needs to happen every single day so that your system can repair and reset itself. So that's a really, really important aspect of it. That's a simple tip that you can add in. Taking the right kind of probiotic, right? So we studied the megaspore biotic, the spore-based probiotics for their ability to resolve leaky gut, right? And leaky gut, as I mentioned earlier, is at the root cause of driving most dysfunctions, because that chronic inflammation from leaky gut can be traced back to virtually every chronic illness, right? It plays a significant role in it. So resolving that leakiness in the gut is going to be really important. Diversifying your diet as much as you can, right? People end up with these very narrow spectrum diets because they go through all these elimination processes and never reintroduce foods back again. And so trying to start diversifying your diet will really start to improve your overall health and wellness of the microbiome, the diversity of the microbiome, and your ability to be more resilient and recover from disease. And then also simple things like mindfulness work, right? And I know it seems a little kitschy. It's like, all right, meditation, mindfulness work. People talk about it all the time. But anything you can do that allows you to escape a little bit and turn on some of those theta wave functions so you can get a little bit into that meditative state. And it doesn't have to be meditation. You don't have to become a yogi to do it. For me, surprisingly, the thing that really gets me into that state is watching reality TV. Because to me, reality TV is so asinine, right? It's such a departure from what I do during the day, which is all of this complicated scientific stuff, that it's such an escape for me. Like my brain does not have to work at all. I can just kind of lose myself in the spectacle that it is. And I find myself kind of like in this cool, meditative, like relaxed state, just watching the spectacle that is reality TV. It's an escape for me, right? And that was a training throughout college, I think, even where like I would have these long study sessions before big finals and all that. And the thing that I really needed to decompress was like to go to a movie and just sit there, not have to think and just watch, right? And just be present in that space. So I think I trained myself that way. So that's one of the things that's relaxing to me and gets me to escape a little bit, right? So find something, whatever it is, listening to amazing podcasts like these, right? So like things like that get you to escape from your day-to-day thought patterns and all that are critically important. Another thing for me is just going for a drive. I love cars and I love the engineering around cars and high technology and all that fascinates me, right? Being the big nerd that I am. So being able to play music and all that and just kind of drive when there's no traffic, of course, is very meditative to me. And so finding something simple like that allows you to disengage. So these are some simple things that you can do and I promise you, when you add them all up, the additive effect of these things have a profound impact on your biology. And as it turns out, I remember I said in the beginning, I'm going to speak to both ends of the spectrum. The trick is it's exactly the same recommendations on both ends of the spectrum, right? It's just the degree of which your system is dysfunctional, whether you're on this end or that end. But there is dysfunction, and the dysfunctional patterns are the same. It just depends on how severe the pattern is, right? How much of your system it has impacted. That is the only thing that differentiates you from someone who's high functioning and yet not feeling perfectly well like they want to, versus somebody that's chronically ill and can't function much. The patterns of dysfunction are exactly the same. I do a whole lecture for doctors and researchers and all that, showing what microbiome dysbiosis is, right? We all use this term microbiome dysbiosis, but I want to identify patterns and pathologies associated with dysbiosis. And what I show them is the pathology that creates stress response is exactly the same as the pathology that creates Alzheimer's. Those two couldn't be more on other ends of the spectrum, right? One is, I feel a little bit stressed. The other one is my brain stopped working, right? It's you're losing yourself, right? It's one of the scariest degenerative conditions. But the pathology is the same. The only difference is the degree in which the pathology is present. That is, so everything that a chronically ill person should do is the same thing a high functioning person that doesn't feel good should do, and vice versa, right? Because we're working on the basics, foundation aspects of health.
Yeah, that's so well said. I know we're short on time, but I really want to give you a chance to talk about two last things if we can squeeze them in.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I'm really excited about your research that you're doing on the gut-brain axis and how your work applies to that. A large part of our audience is practitioners. Over half the people that come through our practice are practitioners that can't fix themselves.
Yeah.
And I really want to give you a chance to maybe get and treat them to think perhaps a little bit more in this vein and what advice you would give them as well.
So the first thing on the gut-brain axis, so the reason why we're focusing so much on the gut-brain axis, and we've done some of the work that our group has done is now 7 years deep. So I think we've published about 7 or 8 papers in this space on how certain types of microbes can impact the brain in a very significant way. In short, what we're realizing and what's very clear, not only from our work, but the work of literally thousands of other brilliant scientists out there that are doing the work, all the publications are pretty clear. So what tends to happen is the gut acts as a checkpoint for how your body responds to stress. So we all experience stress. There's no doubt about that. And there's no way of getting away from stress, right? There's lots of things that are going to stress us out on a daily basis, whether it's work or family or just, driving down the street and somebody cuts you off or whatever it is, right? So it's not at all unusual to experience stress. We as a species experience stress from the dawn of human evolution. And in fact, that was a very important survival mechanism, right? Because what does stress induce? It induces a flight or fight syndrome. And flight or fight allows you to either stay and defend yourself or flee from whatever danger is there. If the flight or fight system wasn't working well, then you would succumb to whatever it is that was out there looking to harm you. And in the case of human evolution, it's either a predator or, an offending tribe or something like that, where they had actual life and death things happening every single day, right? But that same biology is in place. And now a text will induce the same flight or fight response in us that a tiger would have to our ancestors. And so the biology is the exact same. The severity of the response inside in our system is exactly the same. The big difference between our ancestors and us is they could experience flight or fight and then they could come down from it. They could use flight or fight for what it's useful for, what you need it for, and then they can recover from it. What we're seeing in the modern age is that we don't recover from the flight or fight response. We stay in this activated stress state for a prolonged amount of time from a single stressor, right? And then the next stressor that comes along requires even a lower threshold to activate the flight or fight again, right? So our activation threshold keeps reducing throughout the day. And we all know that, right? So you wake up in the morning and let's say something bad happens, right? Maybe your alarm clock didn't go off, so you're already stressed now because you're running late. Every other little thing that happens to you along the way amplifies that feeling, right? Even though those things are relatively small. And then we end up with this concept that, we're just having a bad day, right? Like everything is going wrong. Whereas if you maybe hadn't started the day that way, those other little stressors may not have seemed as significant, right? Those are things that may roll off your back, like water off a duck's back, and you may just go along your day. But when you activate your flight or fight response and your stress response, then your threshold for what reactivates it becomes lower and lower and lower. And then that happens every day to a point where you end up in this chronic activated flight or fight response state, right? That's called generalized anxiety disorder. There's a diagnosis for it. But even before it gets to a point where a psychiatrist is willing to diagnose you, you have the biology of that happening in your system. Right? We all know what that feels like.
Well, I have no idea what you're talking about. I can't relate.
I don't relate to that at all. I'm very zen all the time. Here's what's scary about it, right? I mentioned this earlier. What we're experiencing right now is stress and as maybe some degree of anxiety, right? Maybe you're not in panic disorder mode, but you're experiencing some degree of anxiety about things. And maybe you're not sleeping as well at night because of it and so on. What you're experiencing now, that pathology is basically pre-Parkinson's, pre-Alzheimer's, right? That same pathology is what leads to the development of serious neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Imagine a kid experiencing that from the age of like 7, 8, 9, right? And they do. Our kids don't deal with stress well, right? They have outbursts and they have behavioral disorders and all that stuff that shows up early on, attention deficit disorders and so on. And that same pathology is leading to the neurodegeneration. And so what we found through our research and through the research of others is that the gut acts as a checkpoint for allowing you to come down from the stressor after you're experiencing. The gut is the key checkpoint. If you have certain bacteria in your gut, they will actually undo the flight or fight response and allow your system to go up, to scale up to the flight or fight response, but then come down from it so that you're not stuck in that state throughout the day. And that every time you experience a stressor, it's a new stressor, not one that accumulates on the previous, right? And so that's been a key focus of ours. What we found is that there's a keystone species called Bifidolongum 1714. that has this unique outer layer to it called peptidoglycan. It's a kind of a protein sugar coating that the bacteria has around its cell. And that peptidoglycan layer is the key ingredient that helps you turn off the flight or fight response. Just having that completely turns off the flight or fight response. As the flight or fight response scales, cortisol levels go up. Cortisol starts to dump into the gut. In a gut that's missing that type of bacteria and that type of outer coating of the bacteria, cortisol makes the gut leaky, increasing inflammation. The inflammation re-triggers the HPA axis. So a single stressor will keep re-triggering the HPA axis throughout the day, re-amplifying the flight or fight response. Versus a gut that has that bacteria and has those peptidoglycan, when cortisol dumps into the gut, it instead gets metabolized, and then the inflammatory response that cortisol creates gets shunted. And in fact, it goes as far as neurotransmitters being sent from the gut to the brain to shift brain waves towards the theta and meditative waves, so that your coping centers of the brain can turn on for you to rationalize through the stress and not actually feel the irrational effects of stress. All this from one bacteria and its component that it makes, this peptidoglycan. And keep in mind, this component, this peptidoglycan, was a critical component when you were in utero and your brain was being developed. If your mom had enough peptidoglycan in her gut, the bacteria in her gut would excrete it. It would go into mom's circulation, make its way to the placenta, where the baby's placenta actually has receptors and transporters for bacterial peptidoglycan. It grabs it, takes it to the baby's brain, where the baby's brain has receptors for it. And the reception of those peptidoglycans stimulates the proliferation and development of the brain. All of that, arguably one of the most important things we want to happen for our babies in utero, is the development of their brain. We've outsourced that signaling to a bacterial byproduct. Just think about, so that's why I keep talking about the osmosis and the symbiotic relationship that we have with the microbes is so critical, because what has happened over the course of evolution is we don't have enough genes in our system to do all the functions we need to be human. We've outsourced a lot of those critical functions to microbes that we harbor from the environment. And if we don't harbor those microbes any longer, we lose those functionality. We lose that ability to stimulate the baby's brain development adequately. What happens then? Then the baby's born with higher risk for things like spectrum disorders and other neurological deficiencies, all because we're missing that one bacterial byproduct from the gut.
You realize everybody is listening to this, trying desperately to figure out how to Google and how the hell to spell this.
Living along on the 1714. Yeah. So fortunately, and this is one of the big problems that I see in the world of research and all that, right? There's something called a translational gap that is well known among researchers and all that, where there's lots of amazing, fascinating research going on at research institutes and universities and all that, right? Brilliant scientists doing this great work. But the vast majority of that work never translates to something that impacts people, right? Because the researchers are focused on research, right? Their whole job and world is to keep coming up with questions that require more funding to do more research. Every researcher's world is surrounded by applying for grants and getting more grants and doing more research. How do you get a grant? You ask more questions. You have more curiosities, right? So the work almost never translates into something that people can use. One of the roles that Microbiome Labs plays is about bridging that translational gap, right? How do we work at that high level of research? And we partner with lots of universities. All this gut-brain work I'm talking about was done in partnership with the number one microbiome research institute in the world called the APC, which is in Cork, Ireland. So we partner with them. This is all the brilliant work that they're doing. We're able to take that work and translate it into a product that actually helps people, right? So the product that we created around all those years of work on these peptidoglycan bacteria and so on is called ZenBiome. And we have published research on the ZenBiome product and strains. And so we can show that you could take this high-level research and translate it to something that actually is going to help people, on a day-to-day basis. So they don't have to Google.
great clinical outcomes adding Zen biome into protocols. It's been phenomenal.
Yeah, because not only, of course, does it help shuttle the whole inflammatory stress response, it also significantly reduces neuroinflammation, which is a significant driver of lots of symptomology that people experience as a result of stress and as a result of dysbiosis and as a result of leaky gut, right? So we're starting to do things like we're designing a study around COVID long hauler syndrome, because we know that that's an autoimmune driven neuroinflammatory condition, right? And we're seeing the same biomarkers that we know the Zen Biome product helps. We're seeing those same biomarkers being elevated in people with long haulers. So then the question is, can we support a healthier immune response in that case, right? So lots of exciting stuff happening with that. But yeah, that's a very important area of work is the gut-brain axis. Oh, you did ask the second part of the question for practitioners. I can address that very quickly because of time. So one thing I love about the functional medicine world is that the vast majority of practitioners within it that I've met have come into it because of their own life experience, right? It's not like somebody all of a sudden in career day in college was like, functional medicine, that's where you make money, so I'm going to go there, right? No, it's because you've suffered through health issues of your own and you haven't found answers in conventional medicine approaches. And so you start researching, you come across this whole other world of functional medicine. I think a couple of things to speak to with regards to functional medicine practitioners and tips and ideas. Number one is functional medicine practice becomes, because of its complexity, becomes very protocol centric, right? Mm-hmm. Which is how do you make it easier to deal with the complexities of all these people's issues? Is you just kind of put people on certain protocols. And although that can help in some ways, in many ways, we have to go back to some of the foundations as well and go, okay, what are we not addressing foundationally in these patients? I'll give you a great example of that. To me, is SIBO, right? SIBO is one of those conditions where functional medicine has gone off the track. Even in the world of functional medicine, where it's supposed to be focused on root causes, we've become obsessed with the symptom, which is bloating. And everything that is targeted towards SIBO is targeted towards trying to reduce the bloating. When the bloating is really, to me, a symptom of a much bigger problem that's occurring in these patients, right? So I do a whole SIBO lecture, and I go through this whole scientific exploratory path that I went through, researching SIBO and trying to figure out what is the root cause of this eventual bloating that occurs. And in fact, the underlying condition is far scarier than bloating. We need to get back to basics of looking at root causes and starting to go, symptoms are secondary. Let's deal with the root cause first, right? And that's one of the things that our company is trying to do.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. I think we need to constantly reorient ourselves towards, are we looking far enough upstream? Because we can be very earnest in our, attempt to reduce symptoms, but why aren't we instead refocusing on how do we claim health? It's very different.
Exactly. And I'm starting to see this kind of play out more and more as medical doctors come into functional medicine more, right? Because medical doctors are trained for symptom management. They are trained for the whole concept of a pill for every ill, right? And as they come in and they're trying to change their paradigm, they are forced to kind of keep going back towards their symptom management, pill for every ill approach to healthcare, right? And because medical doctors, many of them are, the biggest voices, or at least the most listened to voices in our space, we can get kind of distracted by what should actually be targeted. We tend to lose sight of the root cause exploration. Going after the root cause may not actually alleviate the symptoms for a while, right? And that's okay, as long as we're taking the right approach and going back to some of the basics.
Yeah, that requires a lot of trust and education between the client or patient and the practitioner.
Which is so hard, right? Because a client, just like the ones that I talk about, the pressure doctors think they're giving them antibiotics, they are impatient, right? If they don't see improvements within a week or months, then they're wanting to move on. I think the functional medicine practitioners need to be more empowered into understanding the pathologies and being able to explain the pathologies and go, here's why we're doing this for root cause. And you may not, yes, your symptoms may not get better for 3 months, 6 months, but you're doing the right thing because the underlying problem is a bigger problem than the symptom you're experiencing, right? It becomes like incumbent upon companies like us who are doing research and education to really invest in educating our practitioners on those pathologies, right? That's why I do, 60, 70 lectures a year, right? It's not a marketing thing. It's about being a steward for this information and supporting the industry, right? And educating the industry, so empowering the docs and the practitioners.
Wow, what a beautiful note to end on. Thank you for your commitment to the population that needs you most. Thank you for your commitment to the research and pushing the conversation forward for all of us practitioners. We so appreciate, your entire company's approach. It's just really wonderful to work with you guys.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I love any opportunity where I get to talk science and talk about this stuff. Because again, somebody listening is going to get empowered and excited and maybe change something about themselves, right? So that's so worth the time that we put in together.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening. Go to detoxrejuvenation.com to find the links in the show notes to everything we covered in this episode. Please subscribe, review, and share with other humans who need this precious information. Let's help each other. Until next time, love, Sinclair.